And welcome everyone to our SD4H seminar this week. We are very excited that Professor Kate Scow from University of California in Davis is joining us today, who is a professor there and also the director of the Russell Ranch Sustainable Agriculture Facility and runs the Soil Microbial Ecology Lab. She has worked quite a bit with Craig Cohen and Sherry Weiser of UCSF and is involved in many different projects. And I am very excited that she will present not so much her work today, she told me, but a lot of exciting developments in the field that she's working in. So thank you, Kate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'm really happy to be here today. This is what I look like, but I think I'm going to turn my camera off too, just to keep the bandwidth moving. But I'm a professor of soil science and microbial ecology at University of California, Davis. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get into our activities today. All right, but first I'm going to stop my video and share my screen. Right, hopefully this is visible. So what I'm going to be talking about today is more this bigger picture of planetary health, which of course we all are collaborating together on, and focusing on this concept of the relationships between human health and biodiversity and ecosystem services, which are very tied. So that's why I'm keeping both of those words there. And I'm particularly interested in this area as a soil microbial ecologist, where a lot of what goes on in the environment is driven by microbes, whether it's recognized or not. And so I've always been interested in the interconnections between, how the world works, how the world regulates, and microbial communities, and then increasingly microbial communities in human guts, and maybe even other parts of humans, and what are those relationships across these biomes, like of an ecosystems, natural ecosystems in humans. And so there's just lots of just incredible new questions and opportunities to be looking at these really important linkages that, if we can understand them more and learn how to bring them together and engage in practices and protections that help all of the different components, then we have a much better shot at this issue of keeping our planet healthy, and then also humans healthy as part of it. So what I'm going to do in this class period is just briefly go through your learning objectives of your program and how what I think I'm doing fits into that. I want to hear a little bit about your, get to know you a little bit and hear about your experiences with this connection between biodiversity and human health. Then go into some definitions about biodiversity and ecosystem services, looking then at how they impact human health. Then talk about some of the global threats now for biodiversity and ecosystem services and human health. Then we're going to drill more in on agroecosystems. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that's my work. I mean, it's not my work, but what I'm interested in, which is the below ground part of ecosystems, particularly microbial communities. Then talk a little bit about solutions, and we're going to do a small group discussion of the second of your readings that I gave you, the paper on agroforestry, and then end with how we can integrate these concepts of biodiversity and ecosystem services into like public health and nutrition policy and practices, drawing on a new WHO report that explicitly focuses on it, just touching on it. So a lot to be done today, but I hope to do a little bit of participation as we go along the way. So it isn't just me talking. So I have a few polls for you to do, and also you'll be doing this small group discussion about the paper. Any questions about anything so far? All right, well, but hopefully I'll get you to talk in a minute, but I just wanted to map what I'm doing today on the learning objectives of your program, and I put circles around where I think the topic today, what is being addressed by the topic today and your program learning objectives, looking at the relationship between sustainable development and health, and particularly looking at role of climate change and sustainability in food security, nutrition, looking at agriculture, agroforestry, and livestock interventions. And then this third one, which is so important, is integrating thinking and practices, across different disciplines. That's kind of how I read it. Bringing in very different voices from these different disciplines, whom are all integral parts of this broader concept of planetary health. So we'll see where we go with this. And the other thing I want to say is I'm very informal. I prefer that, not a very formal environment. And please just pipe in whenever you have questions about things or you want to make a comment. Please let me know you're there. So I wanted to start with, I think you were prompted yesterday or the day before to think about what is an experience or in a relationship that you've had or that you've observed of this connection between biodiversity, like environmental biodiversity and human health. And I'm wondering if I could get a couple of you or a few of you to comment on this, if you would be willing to share.
So maybe people can either put that in the chat if that's easier for you, or raise your hand. I see two people that have raised their hands. Joy.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. My experience between biodiversity and health is that economically, we tend to find that there's some diseases affect the people who are more poor economically than those who are stable. You find that there are more specific diseases like in the slum areas compared to affluent estates. We have cholera because of the poverty mixing with the poor drainage systems and other stuffs. That's what I can share at the moment.
Yeah, great. Great. Somebody else. There was another hand up.
Yeah, there was another hand up, not right now. Maybe I can share an example from California with the fires that we have here increasingly in recent years and the impact on human health and respiratory conditions. Mm-hmm. And I see that Zadok has their hand up.
Yep.
Yes, is it good morning or good afternoon or good evening?
It's
just
morning
depending on
here, yes.
yeah, it's evening. Yeah, so just in addition to what the former speaker has just said, an example and which exists in the Kenyan context. It's just an addition of what she has said about economically, and now we are looking at the geographical location, depending on the that's as per the biodiversity. In Kenya, we have some areas that are prone to malaria, depending on their proximity to water bodies. For example, we have the coastal regions of Kenya and areas around the lakes. So again, we also have socioeconomic status also being a key factor that also may affect human health. And I'll give an example of, for example, we have the northeastern parts of Kenya where majorly there is inadequate water supply. So you find the water sanitation and hygiene practices are not to the expectation. So most likely in those areas, the health status and nutrition status of people is highly affected by that biodiversity. Thank you.
Yeah, great example. You know what I just realized? I wanted to just have a very quick introduction to each of you before we had started, and I kind of forgot that. But would you be willing just to say hello and who you are and just a tiny bit about you? So maybe start with Zadok.
Okay, sorry, I did not introduce myself.
No, you didn't know you were supposed to. Fine.
Yes, I am Zadok Maingi. I come from Masinde University of Science and Technology in the Department of Nutritional Sciences. I'm currently doing my master's in public health nutrition. Thank you.
Great. How about you, Joy?
My name is Joy Nyahim from Maseno University. My undergraduate was in nursing. Now I'm doing my master's in public health.
Okay, great. Carolyn? Maybe we'll move to Elias.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I don't know if you're getting me clearly because I'm on the road.
It's okay.
My name is Elias Pande. I'm a student of Maseno University, and currently I'm taking a Masters of Public Health. My undergraduate was also in Bachelor of Science in Public Health at IIT, Maseno University. I'm happy to be in this program, and my main focus is epidemiology and population health. Thank you.
Okay, great. How about Christine?
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Christine Magak. I have a clinical background. I work with HFMRI in the HIV program. My undergraduate was in Maseno. I did public health, and I'm currently doing my master's in public health in Maseno. Thank you.
Great. Louise?
Can I?
Anyone, yeah. Anyone else actually who wants to just introduce themselves, jump in, who haven't been yet.
I think Caroline has her mic open now.
Oh, okay, great. Please, Caroline.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe we can move to Lucky.
Sure, thank you. Just people introducing themselves.
Yeah, or whoever else has nice, Sharon and Winnie are still to introduce themselves, or Jomo. This seems to be more difficult than expected.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious how you know, who you are. I'm a soil microbiologist, right? And I think a lot of you are in public health.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I could introduce myself.
Please.
I'm Winnie.
I guess we're having some technical.
Yeah, it might be easier for some of us to just briefly text themselves and put their introduction into the chat function. I also see that people are dropping in and off, on and off the call. But I think the majority of our students are master's students at Maceno, in public health at Maceno University.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think I'm just going to continue then here and move into the lecture part of this. But I do want to say that please, if you have questions as I go, please let me know. All right, so I want to start with a definition of biodiversity, looking at definitions of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I made a poll, and I don't know where I do that if I'm in. Can you run the poll, Anka? Do you see the poll number 1?
Yes, I will do that. So I'm going to launch the poll right now, and that should pop up on your screen, and you just pick one of the answers that are given that you think is most appropriate, and then we will end the poll in I don't know, 20 seconds and see the results. I see so far no one has voted. Are you seeing? I guess everyone's still busy with reading. Let's give everyone a second.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, great. I think we've got enough responses now, so I'm going to end it. And it looks like the most popular definition was the big one, the middle one, which is indeed the, I think the most commonly used definition these days, which is from the UN Convention on Biodiversity. So unlike that one of the short definitions that I gave as a possibility was, which focuses just on who are the organisms, right? What are the different species there? It's actually much broader, the definition of biodiversity. That includes indeed who they are, but also like what they do, what are their functions. So sometimes, especially in microbiology, we aren't necessarily looking just at names of organisms, you know, who you are. We're looking at their deeds. We're looking at what they do. Are they cycling nutrients? Are they improving soil infiltration rates? Are they, you know, suppressing diseases, things like that? So, and then the other, I think, important part is that it's the relationship to their ecosystems. So it's, again, it's not just this bean counting, you know, here's a list of all the variety of birds there. It's actually what also is the variety of the systems that they're living in. So different levels of biological variation at the species level, ecosystem level. These days, genetic diversity is also a really important area of emphasis, but just some broad definitions of biodiversity. Now, what about ecosystem services? And I don't know how many of you have been exposed to the concept of ecosystem services in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. You want to raise your hand, I guess, just to get a quick idea of have you been exposed, or do you use this concept very much? I'm not seeing a lot of hands going up. Okay, so this was a global effort. Oops, that isn't what I wanted to do yet. That happened a long time ago, but this participation of people throughout the whole planet that was trying to build up the recognition of the importance of ecosystems for human well-being, because often ecosystems, aspects of them can't be monetized, right? It isn't like a crop yield where you can see what the benefit is. You get this, income back. There's lots of other things going on in agriculture, but, in general across the whole planet that are essential for human well-being, but we can't put price tags on it. And so there's often it doesn't even exist in people's considerations of, what sorts of choices need to be made about, about land, or, about bringing, say, agriculture into what was formerly a natural area, or in building something. What are the consequences of it? What are some of the losses that are incurred for human well-being when something driven sort of by an economic reason destroys something in the ecosystem that is going to eventually feed back and have an impact on human health. So it's trying to get this concept out there and think about it across like the whole world, with all these different sort of relationships with it and things that the ideas that are brought. So on the right-hand side here, you can see here are these constituents or components of human well-being. People need to be secure. They need to have basic material for good life. They need to have health, which is what you all are about. Good social relationships, ultimately, so that there's freedom of choice and action. So what is the relationship between the ecosystem and all those things? And so we have this classification of what are all these services that ecosystems are providing that lead to these different components of well-being. So let's not worry about all those arrows, because they are really a mess, because there's a lot of interrelationships. It's obviously really complicated. But the way ecosystem services were sort of categorized were in these main groups: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. And by the way, I just want to say, and I'm going to go to another slide in a minute, but I want to just really underscore that biodiversity, you don't see it popping out as a word, but biodiversity underpins a lot of these ecosystem services and is the driving force of these services. And let's look a little bit more at these ecosystem services. So we have provisioning services. So that's like food production or fresh water availability, fuel for energy, biochemicals for supporting ag, and also, for mining material, genetic resources. And then there's regulating services. So that's the capacity of the ecosystem to regulate climate, disease, floods, decontaminate areas when there's pollution. What's the ability of the system to respond to that? Then we have cultural. So this is more like what does the ecosystem provide for human culture? And some of that is like recreational or aesthetic, like and just enjoying nature, but there's also spiritual is a really important part of that. It's very much part of a lot of religions or spiritual practices, educational. So these are all like again, all of these, what we're calling services, because it's a human-centric thinking, right? It's from a human perspective. And then supporting, so which is another set of services that just keep the world going. So like nutrient cycling, like primary production, like soil formation. It's this the supporting and continuation of our planet and all these different processes. And you can start to see maybe some things overlap with one another, but let's not worry about it. And there's actually been some critique about this whole approach of millennium assessment, that there was a really good focus on the environment, but not very good focus on sort of the human component, and not very good on how biodiversity is integrated. And since then have become the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and now there's a new one of nature's provisioning to humans. There's a new framework as well, but this is an older one, but it does very well for us to think about what we're talking about today. And then here is just some examples of, you know, a variety of different kinds of ecosystems with some of the services that they provide, just to be able to contrast. Like, so marine is provisioning with the fish, but also can play a role in climate regulation. And for example, here's the cultivated world, cultivated ecosystems where there's timber and agriculture. And then you could have, yeah, urban engagement in air quality regulation, water regulation, you know, if that's built into an urban system. It isn't always built into urban systems. Sometimes urban ecosystems just suddenly pop up like a mushroom. But so, but I'm hoping, hopefully you get an idea of, you know, what are all these different kinds of processes and functions that are so essential for human well-being. Are there any questions about this so far? And Anka, I imagine if something comes up in the chat, could you just tell me what the question is? And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So if people feel more comfortable putting stuff in the chat, because it might be a little easier on the technology side, we are monitoring the chat.
Okay. Yeah, please let me know if you have questions or comments to make so far. Okay, so boy, I wonder if you're looking at phones, how many of you are on phones, and how well you can see some of these things. But hopefully, you also will have the PowerPoint afterwards, I imagine, right? That you can look at some of this. But this is just a big overview now of starting to like unpack this relationship between biodiversity and human health. And the World Health Organization has done a lot of work on this recently, and is a great resource for a lot of material on this. A lot of great thinking that brings together people from, again, around the world to think about these things. So we have here biodiversity as the root of this tree that has health outcomes at the kind of the center of the above ground part that is connected by these branches to all these different large sort of components, which include ecosystems, food and water security, sustainable development, climate change. And then as you move out on the, branches, you can see here's things like disaster risk or air quality, like Anka already talked about, like our air quality in California that's related to burning of forests. So, you know, very, very stark, clear relationships between ecosystems and human health, water quality, microbial biodiversity, an increasing area of interest, particularly things like immunity to diseases that you might get by being exposed more to soils and to ecosystems, although there's also potential negative impacts on human health of exposure to pathogens. And then infectious diseases, traditional medicine, that comes straight from people's relationship for centuries to their ecosystems and finding, ways to treat disease and stay healthy. But then also the biomedical pharmaceutical discoveries. Our first antibiotics actually came from warring actinomycetes and fungi in soil. They were discovered by people at the beginning of the 1900s. These compounds that were produced by microorganisms who were competing with each other in the soil that have had huge benefits for humans, and we continue to look for those examples. Mental health, increasingly in the U.S., there's a lot of people now who have very little contact with nature at all, and recognition that this actually has can have a negative impact on people and people's mental health, and trying to rebuild some of those relationships. Agricultural biodiversity is another piece of that. We have, we'll talk more about this when we do talk about agriculture, but we've done a really good job in the US of really destroying a lot of the biodiversity that originally was there in agricultural systems and in our soils, that we're suffering now some of the consequences of that being gone. So there's lots of lessons out there all around us that are going on. And I think, once one starts to think about it a little bit, one can see all kinds of connections, but it's definitely very complicated because there's a lot of different pieces to this. It involves people from a lot of different disciplines whom sometimes never ever will talk to one another in their lifetimes. So just bringing them together is, something that needs to happen to be able to get these conversations going. And then we also have issues of language, within our disciplines. And I don't know if I'm already using a bunch of terms that are, not ones that you're familiar with, and you could definitely bring up lots of terms that I don't understand as well. But the fact that everything is so interconnected, and how can we build on that? And what are the things that we need to do to be able to, understand these things and then come up with solutions to try to improve things, not only for humans, but also for the rest of the biodiversity on the planet. Any questions so far? Anything you want to put in the chat? Anyone want to tell me that you are there and hearing? Anyone? Do I have a witness? Do I have any witnesses to what I'm saying?
Looks like you have 17 witnesses right now.
Okay. Anyone want to say anything? Any comments? Any thoughts? Okay. I know it's hard this way. Okay. I want to talk about so global threats, which a lot of people are thinking about from very different perspectives. And this is a diagram that a scientist named Rostrom originally started to develop, which is talking about planetary boundaries and thinking about the Earth as a, being a safe operating space for humanity. These interesting metaphors. But you see here this circle that's divided into these pieces, these pie pieces that represent different kinds of very important aspects of for our planet. And I can just go around here. Climate change obviously is one of them. There's a lot of global threats. It's a very, very large one. We also have ozone depletion, aerosol loading into the atmosphere, ocean acidification, biogeochemical flows. That's like too much nitrogen, or depletion of phosphorus are examples of that have big impacts on agriculture. We have fresh water use. We have land system change. So this is like the, the conversion of natural lands into urban settings or peri-urban. And then we have the biosphere integrity, which is our biodiversity, functional and genetic diversity, like who you are and what you do. And so in terms of where we are with, are we in a safe operating space, or are we starting to go beyond, what is sort of a safe place to be with respect to maintaining it, preserving it. And you can see that the ones that are in the greatest harm, that have the highest beyond the zone of uncertainty, very high risk, include biodiversity for sure. There's some fuzzier ones where we don't really know very well yet. That's shown with like the atmospheric aerosol loading or novel entities as a catch-all for other things. You can see that in the functional diversity, we're starting to learn more about it. So there's some uncertainty, but in terms of the genetic diversity, we know that we already have really brought down, we've really taken down a lot of the biodiversity that's been on this planet previously. And the other places with these biogeochemical flows, which we're going beyond the safe boundary for that in terms of nitrogen moving into our atmosphere and into lands where there wasn't high nitrogen. And that's more of a problem in China and the US, but it's waiting for other places as well. And then you can see land use change, climate change are in this area of increasing risk. So
we have a question in the chat from Joy. How does genetic biodiversity bring about increased risk?
Okay, I'm sorry. So the idea is that not increasing risk, it's like we have reduced it significantly, genetic diversity on the planet. So we're in an area of high risk because of the reduction in the genetic diversity. I hope that's clear. I wasn't very clear to start out. Okay, so when we're looking at climate change and human health, this you can break down, and so this is climate change, or I should have called it global change. So it's global change's impact on biodiversity and ecosystem services within consequences for human health. So we can look at 3 different sort of kinds of human health impacts. And that includes very direct impacts, where people are just overtly affected by the change. And that could be like floods or, air pollution. Then there's a lot of indirect impacts, which are consequences of the environment changing or of biodiversity being reduced by these global changes. And then what are the impacts on people that come from those changes, like in less land available for agriculture or very depleted soils that can't support food production very well anymore, or where the water now is very contaminated and people can become ill from that. And then the third category is a more sort of existential issue, that when populations are, they say, demoralized or displaced by climate change, and resulting in economic dislocation or migration, and there's other kinds of stresses that are coming from this, which include trauma and psychological issues as well. So just these, and of course, these aren't distinctly different kinds of categories, but it kind of helps you to think about sort of the different sorts of impacts on health that can result from these global changes. And I think this is a very nice figure which breaks this down a little bit more easily. So on the left-hand side, you see here are these environmental changes and ecosystem impairments. Like again, and it's a bit redundant, but it's just again listing climate change and the ozone and forest clearance, land degradation, loss of wetlands, biodiversity loss, depletion of freshwater, urbanization, and coral reefs and ecosystems. Some of you are, maybe living near the coast and experience some of these changes directly. So what are effects, examples of sort of the impacts on human health? So talking about the direct ones, that would be like the floods, heat waves. In California, we're experiencing, throughout the US, extreme heat right now that's coming about from climate change, where sometimes we're getting into temperatures that people can't survive. Water shortage, landslides, exposure to UV radiation with the ozone layer going down, and direct exposure to pollutants. So those are some of the direct health effects that maybe some of you are working in these areas. Then we also have then these ecosystem mediated health effects. So these indirect effects, which then result in changes in the risk of infectious diseases because of changes in the ecosystem. It can be these reduction in the yields and less food or less quality food, resulting in undernutrition and stunting, particularly as our soils get very degraded. Loss of natural medicines that people used to be able to find, our grandparents. I might be your grandparents' age. My grandparents maybe, could find out in their world to treat things. Mental health issues that come from nature being lost and not having that exposure to nature. And then aesthetic and cultural impoverishment again from these changes in ecosystems, which are again these more existential kinds of issues, which sometimes are, take a lower priority to some more urgent issues going on. And then these displacement, that what we're talking about, the third category, which is what happens to people when they lose their livelihood, when it's no longer possible to fish off the coast and you're part of a culture that's done that for generations and generations, and now there's just not enough fish anymore. So it's like a big change to what you could do before. Also on farms, I think, as productivity goes down, the children of farmers are more may want to move to other areas. Population displacement, so creation of these slums where people come to live who have been displaced from somewhere else. Conflict there, I think there's a lot of conflict in the world that's actually tied back to changes in ecosystems due to like water availability reduced, so conflict over water, maybe conflict over also good land. Yeah, I mean, it's just, everything is very connected, and you can see I can't even begin to scratch the surface of this great complexity that is involved in what we're talking about today, these relationships between biodiversity, ecosystem services, and human health, with human health, as you can see, very broadly defined here. Any comments, questions? All right. So I'm wondering, are any of you experiencing losses of biodiversity around you? Could we have some examples? Could you share either in the chat or just talking? I can wait. It'd be nice if. Yeah.
Joy has her hand up.
Okay. Hi, Joy.
Sure, we are experiencing losses in biodiversity. Like with climate change, we have a different weather now. We are prone to floods and more droughts that are dramatic in occurrence. This means that our crop production has gone down. The yields are less. And with the floods, we have other diseases coming in caused by the floods. And these in turn already add to the burden of HIV that we are already seeing, because we are having people losing their livelihoods. We are having poor nutrition because of low yields. And it's becoming a cycle that it's making the tough condition get worse.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah, all connected, and yeah, and so that it's not maybe directly impacting, the HIV virus itself, but it's all these other kinds of indirect impacts on people who are already in trouble with HIV, dealing with HIV, because yeah.
Louise added a couple of comments into the chat, such as flooding of lakes and rivers, populations being displaced, and health services and supplies not being accessible.
Okay, yeah, good one. Others? Is there a lot of displacement of populations in Kenya these days that is related, or that you see related to these changes? You can just write it in the chat too. Okay, let's go on. So and look how much agriculture has already been brought up in these discussion points. So let's shift our focus to agricultural ecosystems as a particular kind of ecosystem, where I think this is really important. So I made a poll, Anka, if you can do the second poll. And I'm just curious, what is your background with farms and farming? So just very simple questions to ask, just so I can get a sense of your connection to agriculture.
Great, so I can see answers coming in.
Yeah, let's give it a little more time. I know there's more than 8 of you there. Okay, so yeah, the questions were, did you grow up on a farm? did you spend a lot of time on farms, you know, throughout your life, or are you rarely on farms? And here, sharing the results. And so it's kind of an even mix of maybe a little bit more rarely spent time on farms, which was definitely my situation in growing up, as I was hardly ever on farms. I was in, you know, a town. But there are people who have indeed grown up on a farm, or maybe visiting family a lot and spending time on farms. So pretty good mix. Okay, so just a few words about biodiversity and agroecosystems. So by nature, right, or just by the definition, their agroecosystems are heavily managed systems, particularly increasingly so these days. So humans are you know, directly engaged with manipulating the biodiversity. I mean, think about it. When we grow monoculture, and you're just putting one plant there and you're not letting other plants grow there. So definitely reducing the biodiversity, modifying the, you know, environment in which the organisms live through, you know, tillage and adding amendments. And it's interesting, there's been a, you know, definitely in the US, this real divorce from nature, and thinking about what are some of the things going on in that ecosystem that we could leverage, that we could use, because all these processes are indeed going on. But we think we can do everything ourselves. So a lot of soils have become like growth media, where you stick in your plant and you pour on your fertilizer and you pour on your pesticide, and you know, you're not really thinking about it as an ecosystem. You're thinking about it almost like a greenhouse or something. And therefore we're really dependent on fossil fuels, and we really don't get to take advantage of what is some of the ecosystem services that we talked about a little bit earlier when we were defining that. And you know, so what is a really interesting question is how much, and in the long run, I think we're getting in trouble because of that, because we're not paying attention to the ecosystems that these are. And how far can you take it? How much can you compromise biodiversity and still keep these systems functioning, and then particularly in a changing environment? So I want you to just take a few minutes and look at this picture of a farm in a broader ecosystem, and think about what are some of the ecosystem services associated with biodiversity that are shown here, and what are some of the relationships between them. You know, are they compatible with each other, or are they some of them in conflict with one another? I would love it if you would just put some questions or some comments in the comment section. Or also, you can talk. But anyway, take a few minutes just to look at this and think about these questions. Any comments in the comment section? Or am I asking something that isn't clear?
Now things are coming in: mountains, inland waters, farms with plantations, some forest.
Mhm.
Animals, farms with animals.
And so the services, like the regulating, the supporting, the provisioning. So yeah, so we see provisioning services here, right? With these crops grown and with the animals. We're seeing cultural services with livelihood, right? The people who are making a living off of these farms, maybe over here, fishing. Maybe even there's an area in the forest where there's some spiritual component, you know, I don't know. We can just imagine things for this landscape. The regulating biogeochemical cycling, I think this is a pile of manure, right? That's what I'm guessing, that may come from the cattle. And so that may be put on the crops to fertilize them. So it would be an example of a regulating service. There's flood control going on, right? There's a dam, and this river, you know, is the ability of the ecosystem to like take. This is not part of the ecosystem. This is a human thing, but you can see this river like drains this lake, and so there's times when there might be rapid rainfall, and there's the ability of the stream to take that and hopefully keep it from flooding too much the area around it. But you can start to see, you know, what are these potential ecosystem services that we're seeing in this picture. Okay, and maybe you can think like water quality, right? You may want the cattle to drink the water, but it may end up having an impact downstream by putting pathogens in the water. Right, so there could be some conflicts in how the land is used. Okay, and I just want to make a plug for the below ground part of the ecosystem, because often we just focus on the above ground, you know, the trees, the animals, the bushes, but soil is an extremely important part of ecosystems, but it's not evident, you know, it's not something that you see well, and it's complicated. And it's filled with microorganisms that include bacteria, archaea, and fungi, and then a whole lot of fauna and all these critters that play a really, really big role in, they're a big part of biodiversity, and they're very important in ecosystem services. And huge diversity. In Kenya, I bet it's just mind-blowing, the diversity there that you can find in even a gram of soil. And what does that soil biodiversity do? So here is just another picture like that, showing that here are a lot of the services, the ecosystem services that this below ground biodiversity contributes, like fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere, like microbes with leguminous plants, biodegrading pesticides in the field, suppressing disease of plants. There's organisms that are like helpful to plants and help them fight diseases. Building soil organic matter, a really important part of soil, and something that, like in California, we're trying to bring back higher soil organic matter. And I think also it's the same issue in some of the tropical soils that are very old and weathered, is building that carbon back up. Like cycling of nutrients that help plants grow. So here's some disservices. Antibiotic resistance might be developing, and there may be contamination of food going on. But here's the good side again: breaking down wastes, making compost, consuming greenhouse gases, carbon sequestration, but also it does contribute as well. Soil structure is very dependent on soil biodiversity. So very, very important roles that this below ground biodiversity plays in ecosystem services. So the benefits of agricultural biodiversity, it's kind of obvious. I'm not going to spend time on this, but it's FAO put out this poster to try to promote this idea of how important biodiversity is in agriculture. Third poll, Anka, if you could put the third one up. So do you think Kenya or the USA have greater biodiversity in their agricultural ecosystems? Yeah. Okay, well, Kenya has won by a landslide. Yeah, most people think Kenya has much more biodiversity in their agricultural systems than the US. And let's look at that. And indeed, I think that is the case for, definitely for our intensively managed agricultural systems, is we have lost a lot of biodiversity. This was a really interesting study that was done by a person who went around, the link is up here, and took this frame of a cubic foot and put it partly in the soil and partly above ground to like measure, to collect all the organisms you could find within that frame and count them, quantify them. I wish I had an example of Kenya, of a Kenyan ecosystem, but I have an example of a forest in Costa Rica in South America, and an example of a park. Oh, darn it, I just gave the, the result away. But anyway, in Cape Town, South Africa. And so you can see in both cases, they're just very, very biodiverse ecosystems. And I think that you would find this and in the rainforest in Kenya even far more biodiversity than that. And then this was done in a cornfield in California. I mean, not in California, we don't grow very much corn there, but in the Midwest, where we have massive expansion of land that's corn or soybeans, very little biodiversity. And look at what they found in that cubic. I think it might be a cubic meter. Just a phenomenally low amount of biodiversity. A lot of corn, but very, very little biodiversity. So a lot of what I just went through in the previous figure was just not there, and not functioning. A lot of those ecosystem services just are not there. Yeah, and then we can think about what are the consequences of it. It's what I'm saying. It's like there's so much that biodiversity brings that actually could be very helpful to the farmer, that without the biodiversity, you're just going to lose out on that. So finding solutions, what do we do to try to integrate this human health aspects and biodiversity? And so I have 3 examples. Here is a health impact pathway on the left-hand side, which shows you where are the different places that you can come in and intervene along this series of events that are leading from things going on in the ecosystem to actual a human health consequence. So we have extreme rainfall and flooding that leads to overflow of waste from septic tanks, places where waste is disposed into floodwaters. Then there's human contact with the floodwater, and then gastrointestinal diseases. And you can see there's a lot of different places, and we start to think about planetary health here, right? It's a lot of different places where intervention can happen. And, for example, with the disease at the bottom, it's like medical treatment, but also maybe there's the ability to increase immunity of people, which is more of a problem with people who are never exposed to nature or farms. Then above that, avoiding human contact with water, you know, in doing something with the landscape to make sure that water doesn't end up coming in contact with people. Moving on up, it's, you know, doing something with our waste disposal system so they don't interact with the environment, they don't spill over into the environment, to, you know, preventing flooding from happening at all. And their soil management is a huge part of that, because with good soil structure, you're going to have much better drainage of the water down into the groundwater and not flooding across the surface. Here's another example. Here is a study below that by these authors, where how forest conservation reduces disease risks in the Brazilian Amazon. And here are they focus on malaria, acute respiratory infections, and diarrhea. And then here, by maintaining the forest and conserving it, forest conservation practices, here were some of the consequences of that impacted, for example, malaria, that there were fewer places where the vectors could breed. There was more mammals that the mosquitoes could go after with greater conservation, so the humans wouldn't be the only ones that are being hit up. And also changes in microclimate that might affect some of the mosquitoes. With respiratory, the forest may filter air particulates. With forests not being destroyed and burned, you have fewer fires and lower smoke, and also burning of biomass fuels. And then diarrhea as well. What we were just talking about in the previous example about flooding and filtering pathogens. If you have a forest with a good soil structure, it can actually regulate a lot of that, so that those pathogens never even get into surface water and get people in trouble. The third example was the article that I gave you to read, which we're not going to have time to discuss in the small groups, but I have a series of questions here about the article. So this was written by Todd Rosenstock and other authors and it was looking at benefits of agroforestry. So agroforestry as an intervention to be able to make agricultural systems more diverse and maybe not go the way, like for example, that the US agroecosystems have gone, which is integrating plants like your cash crop with forests, with growing trees, but also with animals. And it's a really nice article, I think, that talks about impacts of agroforestry on food availability, infectious diseases, non-communicable diseases, migration, and then what are the three main drivers of it. So I really recommend that you take a look at it. I mean, you may have already read it, but these questions can help guide you in thinking about it. I think it's just a great example of this whole concept that we're talking about today. All right, I'm not going to look at this one, but it's just, so what do we do? What's the frameworks out there? How can we mainstream biodiversity and get it into human health and nutrition? And there was 2020 just published by WHO, just a fantastic document that's big and filled with all different kinds of information. But they talk about the 6 building blocks that are needed for mainstreaming biodiversity. That's how they're talking about it. Let's just make it part of just how we do things and how we think about things. And it's knowledge development and co-production. So it's like me talking with you, you know, and our sharing our different perspectives, but also, you know, building and more knowledge, enabling environment where you have policies and measures that help people in food systems, health systems, be able to tap into these concepts about biodiversity. Integrating biodiversity and nutrition into research and policy, conservation, greater conservation practices into production, but also seascapes and I think natural systems as well, protecting them. Education and awareness raising, which is a really important part, getting school kids to be exposed to this from the very beginning. And then monitoring and evaluation, like how do you know that what you're doing is working? And here I'm going to give you two terrible tables that are from this report that I'm talking about. Again, this is the picture of it, this WHO report, which if you're interested in this concept of planetary health and the connection between biodiversity, this is just an amazing, very new report. Here is a list of interlinkages between biodiversity and human health and how the health sector might respond to these different linkages. So for example, disease source and regulation services, what the health sector can do is integrate ecosystem management considerations into their health policy, like protection for things in ecosystems that might reduce infectious diseases. Another example is, well, you can see it. I don't need to read all these things out, but it's I think worth spending time if you are in the public health sector and thinking about these issues of how we can make better integration of some of these concepts I've been talking about today, and really developing this robust concept of planetary health. There's a lot of good information here. And then the other terrible table are the indicators. So how do you do monitoring and evaluation? How do you know what you're doing is getting anywhere? And here are cross-cutting indicators. So these are ones that try to capture these relationships between these things that we've been talking about. So for example, you might measure, source water and look particularly for pesticides and harmful things to humans in that, in dealing with water quality. You may measure diversity of food species, or how much land is used for producing traditional foods, or what are outbreaks of foodborne diseases. These might be indicators that are helping you think about these relationships. Infectious diseases, like where is there intact habitat? How much intact habitat is there in high risk areas that might help buffer some of these diseases? Where are outbreaks occurring? How is land use changing? Keeping track of that. And then there's a whole lot of concepts here in disaster risk and climate change as well. So a lot to look at here. I'm mainly just wanting you to know that this is available, and if it is something that you weren't aware of as a very important, I would say, Bible for this area that we're talking about. And then just ending with, we have health, we have a human as an individual, we have the concept of public health. What can we do to like preserve, on a societally good health that impacts the individual, to global health, to One Health, which to me, One Health, I think really was brought about by the veterinarians and people in animal science, which said it's not just humans, it's also animals. But the One Health concept doesn't really, I think, include, maybe people define it differently, but usually doesn't include plants or ecosystems, but it's planetary health that encompasses plants and microbes and all these ecosystems together with the human health aspect. And I think it's a great program that you are in, and I think you're going to have a lot of opportunity to like explore these concepts more. And I want to just let you know that I'm available to talk more about that. If you want to send me an email, I'm also happy to like meet with some of you if you want to drill in on any aspects of this. I know I presented a lot of information here, but if it's of interest to you, I'm really happy to spend a little more time with you thinking about it, and also suggesting resources you can go to be able to find out more about these things. So I think I'm going to stop there and take any questions that you might have. And thank you very much for listening to this long and in some places detailed presentation.
Thank you so much, Kate, for this really packed presentation that I'm sure contained a lot of new information for many of us. While we're waiting in for more questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. I maybe have one, knowing that you are so, on the pulse of all of this. What do you think are the most underappreciated fields that are critical going forward for managing climate crisis worldwide? Like if you got into $1 gazillion in a foundation, where would you put your resources?
Well, I'm a soil scientist, but I find that soil science is really surprisingly, it's starting to get a revival, but it's definitely like most universities don't have soil science departments anymore. It's like buried into other kinds of ecology departments or just in agriculture. But soil science is so much more than, crop production and fertility management. Soils provide so many of those ecosystem services that we were talking about before that relate to water and nutrient cycling, disease suppression, that I think it's a big one. And it's how people can be exposed more to it, I think would be important. And I think it's the same with marine systems as well, especially like on, more closer to shore, right? Where people are engaging and interacting with those systems as well. Yep.
Thank you. Joy has her hand up. She has a question.
Hi, Joy.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, in your line of work, which specific, like in soil science, if you're dealing with microbes, which specific microbes of great interest to you, or is there any microbe that is of great interest that maybe is going into extinction or anything like that in terms of health and other soil sciences that deal with maybe agricultural production? Thank you.
That's a great question. It's interesting. It's a lot of what is important in soil microbiology are the communities of them, are the consortia is one word. It's because most don't operate as individuals. They're operating in these communities. So what's important then is to be able to maintain habitat for them, that they can all be together, like in a sense in their village, and carry out the things they do together. So some of it is about just preserving that, like making sure you don't till the soil so much that there's not habitat where they can come and get diverse and carry out all these different functions. So that's part of my answer. But there are specific organisms that are really interesting, like groups of organisms. One are the plant growth regulating microbes that live really, really close to plant roots, that are so important in helping the plants acquire nutrients that are hard to get, like phosphorus. That's a big issue in tropical soils, and also that reduce disease. I keep talking about disease, but just like humans, if we're healthy, we have good health, then we have a lot of immunity and can suppress a lot of the diseases that might hit you. You might get something that could potentially hurt you, but you don't succumb to it. And that same concept is there with plants as well. That there's a lot of, and this is in part because we have many beneficial organisms in our body, and in plants there's many of these beneficial plant growth regulating organisms that are so important for disease suppression. there's so many organisms, mycorrhizal fungi, who are organisms that live on plant roots and help them access nutrients like far, far away through the hyphae growing out in the soil, are super important, but often agriculture is not a friendly environment for them. We often like disrupt their hyphal networks, but I think there's a lot, they have huge benefits in ways that often we don't, in ways we don't even understand yet. So those are some examples. It's a great question, thank you.
Thanks, Joy. I'm looking if there's another, I see some comments in the chat thanking you for the lot of new information and the very informative presentation, which helped us to understand the difference between what One Health and planetary health actually is. That slide here makes it really clear. So does anyone else have a question or last comments as we are approaching the end of our session today? And as always, we will post the readings and the recordings and the slides so that they're available to you.
And again, I encourage you to reach out if you want. My email is on the front page, and also I think Anka and Rachel could help facilitate that as well if you wanted to discuss any more of these things. I think this is a really important area that I'm super interested in coming from my side. So really interested in the learning more about how this matters on the public health, human health side.
Okay, I don't see any and see a comment from Pauline coming in again, commenting on how interesting the presentation was and these new concepts, how to improve food security and diet diversity through increased biodiversity. So thank you so much, Kate, for exposing us to new concepts and new ideas today, and to make us more aware how important they are for our field, for human health and public health, and how we really need to pay more attention on that interplay in the future. And we will be in touch. We'll make sure that students can get in touch with you. They have more questions. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a good rest of the evening and a good rest of the week.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for
Bye.